So now that we've got the Christmas overindulgence out the way, I wanted to kind of put this video together just to kind of explain some interesting thing I've found recently. Just been looking at understanding energy availability, so specifically low energy availability, RED-S, which is something that we start to see more of with athletes, and it is definitely a big issue. But I think the big issue comes from that we've been told for years that eating less, train more is the solution if you want to lose some extra weight. And I think that advice isn't just wrong. I think it's actually why performance stagnates, especially with endurance athletes who train consistently day in and day out. So yeah, I put together some kind of thoughts on this, and ultimately, hopefully, going to give kind of a better awareness from it. Now, I just want to caveat: I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not kind of qualified as a nutritionist, but I think some of the information in here makes sense when you look at it, and it started to certainly open my eyes up to information I didn't know, and hopefully, I can pass that on to you that makes sense. So kind of three kind of types of athletes, I guess. So someone who's struggling to lose weight, an athlete who constantly gets injured or has niggles, and then probably the more worrying one is sort of young athlete maybe with normalised dysfunction, regular hormone kind of regulation. I think that's something that we want to address primarily as coaches as a primary function before we even worry about performance. Yeah, so just some of these might resonate with you. You might not kind of resonate with any of them, but that's fine. It's just giving you sort of three rough examples. Pause the video if you want to have a look at these in more detail, but I think the general sense is three different athlete types. Especially the normalised dysfunction one here. So may have experienced stress fracture, bone reaction with no obvious trauma. Something that can indicate some of the issues that we're going to discuss here is takes longer to heal from cuts and grazes than maybe it should. That tells me something that we need to sort. Ultimately, if you identify any of these, doesn't mean you're necessarily broken. It just means there's a couple of things in here that we need to address, but you're probably dealing something we call low energy availability. And I want to just use this time to kind of chat through. It's not just using generic guidelines. We're going to chat you through the maths on how we calculate exactly what your body needs so we can exit the danger zone and ultimately get people performing better. But yeah, have a look. If there's any of these that you resonate, have a look and see if any of them make sense to you. So, difference between low energy availability, LEA, and RED-S. So, LEA is low energy availability. It's the state of having insufficient energy to support basic physiological functions. So, the way to think about this, it's a bit like in your car, your engine light comes on, and you keep driving it, you don't take it to the garage, nothing gets checked. Just a warning there, the engine's still working fine. If we continue to ignore that for too long, we are at risk of running into something called RED-S, which is Relative Energy Deficiency in sport. And it's a systemic outcome. It's ultimately a syndrome of where the impaired health performance that's been impacted because we've stayed in low energy availability for too long. So effectively, we've driven down the road for another 5,000 miles, and all of a sudden, something in the car goes catastrophic. We get serious blowout of the engine. It's more damaging to fix, or it's more costly to fix. It's going to take longer to fix, and we don't want that to kind of happen. So the way that this kind of tends to trend is we see low energy availability, the body adapts to having less energy, and then we get things like RED-S symptoms. And say the check light on the engine's come on, we need to check it. If we don't check it, we get to the problem where we've got an athlete or ourselves that's dysfunction, things aren't working properly, the hormones aren't regulating the way in which they should. So let's look at the equation. How do we calculate this? So energy availability for the body is effectively the energy intake, so how much calories you take in, minus how much exercise you do. So that's, let's just say, an hour of exercise per day. So if you're taking in 2,000 calories and you ride your bike for an hour or go to exercise class for an hour, roughly 500-600 calories of that's kind of taken up. And we divide that by your free fat mass. So your free fat mass is effectively muscle and organs that are metabolically active. So that's like excluding what your body fat is stored in your body. So your body fat doesn't need energy to sustain itself, whereas anything that's calculated into free fat mass does. It's going to use energy. And then we can put this kind of traffic light system in. So anything below 30 is dangerous. That's where we get into low energy availability. We can be there for a short period and it's not going to be a problem. Again, if we stay there for too long, big issues start to happen and we don't want to be there. Suboptimal, 30 to 45. Again, caution, that's a good range to go if you are trying to lose weight. But the range we should be training towards for athletes, and if we're working with athletes, should be around about the 45. And that's kilocalories per kilogram of free fat mass per day. Because ultimately, if you drop too low, the body doesn't burn fat anymore. It doesn't use the energy stores that you have available. It starts to shut down the system. So it's thinking like your phone. Imagine the battery messages come on, say your battery's now running low, goes into safe mode or low battery mode. It stops doing some of the background tasks. It stops doing things like updating apps. It stops checking for your emails. And it'll keep doing that until either you replug it in and charge it again, or until the battery drains consistently. So, but the phone still works. So I think we need to be careful. Is like you might not see the problem, and I think that's where we do see the issue with we can restrict calories for a period of time, and we don't necessarily see all the issues, and it leads to bigger problems. So let's just put some maths against our the people that we used as an example. So the kind of weight loss resistor. So a female, 54 years old, roughly 75 kilograms and say 25% body fat. The goal is to lose some additional body fat. So we go on the traditional 1800 calories per day. It's a standard number that people would use for losing weight. And we maybe she goes to an exercise class, does body pump for an hour, spin class for an hour, whatever it is, doesn't matter. We want to then calculate out. So her free fat mass we calculate as 75 times her body weight percentage. So it's 75 times 25%, which gives us 18.75 kilograms of stored fat. The free fat mass is effectively the difference. So we take her body weight minus her stored fat. We get a free fat mass for this athlete of 56.25 kilograms. Now we know that she's eating 1800 calories per day and burning roughly 600 calories per day. Now you can obviously calculate this to be a bit more accurate, but we're just looking at real high level just now. So she has 1200 calories available for her body to carry out its basic function. So if we use the energy availability equation, so we do 1800 minus 600 divided by 56.25, we get 21.3 kilocalories per kilogram of free fat mass. So that puts this athlete into the danger zone. This puts her into the point where her body is going to down-regulate. It's going to start shutting down some of the symptoms. So what tends to happen here is the body thinks it's being starved. So things like your thyroid will start to slow down. Your fat loss will completely stop. You're eating normal calories, but effectively your body works as if it's not. So you're actually seeing this athlete's not actually eating enough at that. And then the weight loss stall would tend to be that thinks that, I need to restrict calories further, or start doing 2 classes a day. And that's really common. I see it with quite a lot of people when they start training twice a day. They go to every single class and they don't increase the calorie intake. And that's where they get more frustrated because they stop losing weight, and it's even more so an issue for female, maybe in the sort of 50-55 category, where, obviously hormone changes are happening with menopause anyway. We want to kind of speak to this athlete, and actually we need to increase their daily intake because health issues will probably start to present themselves if this athlete stays in this state for too long. Or in most cases what will happen, they'll get fed up, they'll get frustrated, and they'll stop doing the activity, and they'll never get out of the kind of dysfunctional issues that they have. Now again, if we look at the second athlete, so let's just choose a male, 28 years old, 72 kilograms, 12% body fat. It's reasonably lean, kind of typical what you'd see kind of male Ironman, maybe triathlete. They eat a healthy amount, 2,800 calories, but they're not accounting for the massive energy demand of triathlon training, especially something as enduring as a triathlon, especially Ironman. So if we calculate out, they've got 72 kilograms, we times it by their body weight, so 12%, we get 8.64 kilograms of stored fat, and then 63 kilograms of free fat mass. Eating 2,800 calories a day. If they're training for roughly 2 hours per day, we're going to assume that they're burning somewhere in the ballpark of 1,400 calories a day, which leaves 1,400 calories available for the body to carry out its function. Again, remember that the body will prioritize the training or the activity before it will prioritize the internal function. And then we do the calculation. This athlete ends up similar to the first athlete of 22 kilocalories per kilogram of free fat mass. They're effectively running on empty. Testosterone might drop. Recovery is probably slowed down for this athlete. Bone density is going to decrease because there's the body's not able to repair and do that turnover it needs to for bone regeneration. That's where they kind of tend to get niggles injuries, more susceptible to things like stress fractures, which I think we see more and more commonly with athletes. And I think it's partly stemming from not eating enough as well, which we're going to look at in a bit more detail in a second. And then the third athlete, so this is the one I think probably needs more input than someone like myself, just as a coach. This needs probably a bit more medical input, but I think I want to just give the information so that coaches, parents can start to understand that. So, female, 15 years old, 45 kilograms, 18% body fat. Now, some people might think that's high. That's quite common for a female, even being very lean. They tend to have higher body fat percentage than men anyway, so 18% is still pretty lean for a female. Obviously not weighing very much, 45 kilograms. Competitive club swimmer. Issue sometimes can be that they skip breakfast due to early morning training and ultimately eats normal lunch and dinner. So if we calculate out free fat mass for this athlete, again we get to 8.1 kilograms of stored fat and about 37 kilograms of free fat mass. They're eating roughly 1900 calories, which would be normal for someone doing not very much training, but when we think about with swimming is even highly calorie required, is 800 calories, probably even more for a 90-minute squad session because you have the thermal impact of swimming where the body has to heat it up against kind of swimming in cool or cold water. But if we roughly work this out, they've got 1100 kilocalories per remaining. Now, if they train twice per day, which is common in swimming, we have to then double that up, and it could be that they're into 800, and what we get for this particular swimmer based on this example is 29.8 kilocalories per kilogram for free fat mass. So they're higher than the previous two. They don't need as much food ultimately because their mass is a lot lower, but their activity level is still quite high. They're still in that kind of risk zone where it's not healthy and it's not going to be good for them. They're more likely to have issues with hormones that we want to avoid ultimately for a young athlete. But this is a dangerous number, I think, for young athletes who are active, they're growing. Things like reproductive organs are obviously growing and developing. Menstrual cycle for this particular athlete might be delayed, might never have started yet. And it ultimately compromises their long-term health and even just their height potential, how tall they can get. We can effectively stunt their growth because of this issue. And ultimately, when we subtract the work required for training, their tank's empty. Again, if we just assume that they're going to train another time per day, maybe they do PE in school, they're going to burn through another 500-600 calories per day. And if we're not replacing and eating beyond that, we're constantly restricted for this athlete. And again, what might happen is the athlete starts to slow down, starts to lose motivation to train. We just think it's a certain issue with their age, and the reality is it's not. It's the fact that they're just not eating enough, so their body can't carry out function. The feelings that they have are genuine. It's not just that they're tired and they don't want to do it. It's actually because their body's not eating enough, and those signals are being told to the athlete, and we need to address it with the athlete. Otherwise, this is going to be an athlete who's going to have chronic health issues that is caused because the information they were given is maybe not right. So ultimately, the price we pay for RED-S, so this is quite a common graph you might see, which is a big issue. So bone health, stress fractures, osteopenia can be a big issue. Metabolic rate, so their RMR, which is something I wrote a blog about, my own issue, which again leads why I got interested in stuff. Ultimately, endocrine function might decrease or change, so testosterone for males, estrogen for females. Immunity, big thing at this time of year. Why kids, I think, are more likely to get ill and pass that illness on. But the immunity, that suppresses training ability, so we want to reduce that where possible. Decreased endurance, because their glycogen is constantly depleted. They lose the ability to build strength because they're just not eating enough, so the muscle starts to kind of cannibalize itself and the body tries to break down muscle to make energy. Impaired recovery, so they're constantly sore all the time. They don't repair the muscle cells as they should. And something I've certainly sometimes had is physiological strain, so irritability, brain fog. You end up just being easily distracted. And I think we see that it's not just maybe that we get tied up watching Instagram or TikTok videos, it's actually that our brain is looking for some simple tasks it doesn't want to focus on, task intensive, so we lose that ability to think. Now when we go back to our young athletes, that's a big issue when we're sending them to school and they're stuck in classrooms all day. They're just not going to be able to learn well because their brain's just constantly kind of fighting against energy deprivation. Ultimately, we'd see performance issues again. I think performance issues are secondary to health issues, but we would see decreased endurance, reduced muscle strength, impaired recovery, psychological strain. Now, the health cost might be that ultimately the invisible damage, the stuff we don't see, and I think this is maybe why we do suffer or can see athletes suffer from it. So we might see, if you look at this being an iceberg, so we can see things like injury niggles, they maybe pick up viruses easier, but what we don't see is things like the metabolism being suppressed. We don't see the decrease in testosterone unless you measure it. We don't see things like osteopenia, or I can't say the word, amenorrhea, where basically you lose the period in females. And I think this can be a big issue. So all these issues aren't seen. We only see what happens in there. Now, another thing that would be part of that is decreased performance. And I think that can be sometimes part of the issue. The athlete, for no reason, just can't perform well. Now, the question ultimately I've had when I've had these discussions with a few athletes recently, when we've looked in it a bit more detail, the fear is, if I eat more, won't I just get fat? This is the kind of general consensus and where we need to kind of break out of. We eat more... slides in the wrong order, but eat more, we get fat, we're going to slow down because of that, so we tend to avoid eating food. When the reality is we eat more, the next slides are on the wrong order, we eat more, ultimately we lower our cortisol again, because the body's not in flight or fight response anymore, because it's not in that kind of constant heightened suppression, and then we can drop the water weight. And that leads to, we can then start to burn fuel, so we can start to use fat, carbohydrates to fuel the activity, where we don't necessarily see that happen because we think we need to eat less because we're going to get fat. Now, you might increase weight, so what you tend to see is a timeline like this. We start eating the right amount for what we're doing. First couple of weeks, maybe we increase glycogen stores, which ultimately increases our water weight, which means the scales look higher, and that's where people get scared and automatically revert back to reduction or reducing calories and just keep feeding the problem. Maybe 2-3 weeks after that, the body comes out of safe mode, the metabolism starts to recover, and we start to see benefit of that. And I think that's definitely something that it's getting over that fear, because we've been kind of misled, I think, on the information about just eating less and exercising more. But I think if you want to see that, like the 54-year-old female that we use an example, if you showed her, and we'll do the numbers in a second, how much calories she needs to eat, the fear is going to be they're going to gain weight, and then they're not going to be, it's going to take them a lot to be convinced to see that. But how do we solve the problem? Now we've addressed it, we understand there's a problem. We need to effectively turn low battery mode off on our phone. We need to make sure that we're getting enough energy so that the phone has enough, our body has enough energy to function. There's 3 steps to this. Step 1, primary goal, exit the red zone. So get the energy availability back up into the kind of higher numbers, certainly 40, 45 would be the target. We need to fuel for the performance, so we need to make sure that we're eating enough to fuel activity, as well as kind of what the body needs. And then we can worry about body composition. There's no point worrying about body composition if the other 2 aren't right, because even if you're a wee bit heavier than you'd like to be, if you're not eating enough to fuel performance, and especially if you're in the red zone, your body composition is not going to be able to be influenced. You're just going to constantly be fatigued. You're just going to constantly be in that flight or fight response. And that's why we want to look at the energy availability equation, because we want to look at how much do you actually need, and what we can then do is work back from that, knowing we want to exit the red zone. If we're there to now, we want to get above 45 kilocalories per kilogram of free fat mass, and ultimately that's going to allow the body to signal that you're safe. Thyroid hormones are going to start to rebuild themselves, and they're going to start to grow again, and then we can start to look at what we need to do the other things. So calculate free fat mass, primary number 1. And not just use a general calorie calculator, because they're so generic and I think they don't work for 90% of us. We need to calculate calories required to get into the green zone. So we ultimately need to multiply free fat mass by 45 kilocalories to get the base level. And a good way to think about this is the amount of rent that your body needs to have available. So the landlord's going to come knocking on the door at the end of the day. Have you got enough money to pay the rent? Because if you haven't, something's going to change. The lights are going to go off, or something else that's going to be catastrophic for us as an athlete. And then we need to add the training burn on top of this number. So we need to work that way, not back the way. So it's not, I'm burning 500 calories, so eat 500 calories more. We need to say, what do we need to be in the green zone? And then what do we need to then factor in if we're doing training? And we're going to go through our 3 athletes and look at that numbers as well. So let's look at number 1, the weight loss resistor. So the goal is primarily not just losing weight. That's what they want to do. The primary goal for us is to restore metabolism. So their problem was they've stalled their weight loss at 1800 calories. They're frustrated, don't see why they can't lose any more weight. We did the maths. What works out, so if we do free fat mass 56.2 kilograms times 45, that's to get us into the green zone. That gives us 2,500 kilocalories, so roughly 2,500 is their base need. That's to get them into the kind of green zone. They want to keep their hour of activity. We need to increase that by another 600. So this athlete needs to eat somewhere in the ballpark of 3,100 calories to store her health to optimum. And again, that comes back to the fear of when you tell someone who's eating 1,800, they need to eat 3,000 calories. They'll think that, oh my God, they're going to gain lots of weight. And the reality is they're not. Their body's going to start to optimize optimally, and they'll feel better for it. So yeah, current daily intake is 1,800. We need to get out of that. We need to eat more. If we get to 2,500 calories, they're going to get into that kind of normalized sort of range, but we want to get them, if they're going to train, 3,100 calories per day is the minimum that they need to eat. And then we've got the fragile Ironman. So the goal is ultimately to stop injuries. We need to get to the race start line uninjured if we're going to perform well. So constantly getting injured, even though they're eating 2,800 calories, which most people look at and go, oh my God, that's a lot of calories. They're eating enough. But when we factor in how much training they're doing and we look at calculating how much they need. So 63.4 kilograms was their free fat mass. We multiple that by 45 to get them out in the green zone. They need roughly 2,800 calories. Plus the 1,400 if they're going to train for 2 hours in a day. This athlete actually needs to eat 4,250 calories on double training days just to ensure they're fueling the activity well. But they can obviously reduce that, so maybe they're only training once per day, it's maybe down by 700, that would be, but they still need to eat probably 3,500 calories per day. Basically, whatever they train, they need to eat above this 2,853 calories. But again, that's going to take them into the green zone. That's where health's going to restore themselves. The testosterone levels are going to start to climb back up again. The bones are going to remineralize, and ultimately the bad luck that the athlete kept getting with injuries disappears overnight. Not overnight, but certainly over a few weeks. So the teen swimmer, so the goal is protect growth. I think body composition in young athletes should be completely irrelevant. We shouldn't even be fundamentally discussing it. I think we should be making sure they're eating enough to grow as a primary function, because performance will come when the athlete is eating sufficiently to grow and to exercise at the rate we're expecting them to. So this athlete, stalled growth, maybe they're not growing as well as they should. Maybe their period hasn't started or has been suppressed and has paused. So we do the mass for this athlete again, we get to 36.9 kilograms of free fat mass. We multiple by the 45. They need at least 1,600 calories per day plus whatever they do in training. So based on our example, roughly 800 kilocalories. So this athlete needs to be in the sort of 2,500 calories and likely more if training load increases or if they become more active. And that extra sort of 500-600 calories per day is a non-negotiable. They need that, because otherwise they're just not going to reach their full potential in terms of height. We're effectively stunting it. And we also need to monitor activity levels. So as they start increasing training, maybe they get into the next squad up, maybe they start swimming twice a day, 3 times, whatever it is. We need to make sure that they are fueling enough for it, and make sure that there's sufficient nutrition for the athlete to function. And I think the big thing we've got, which we need to be very careful with, especially with young females, and again, it's not my area of expertise, but is we need to be careful that she doesn't develop things like lack of body confidence, and that can lead to issues with nutrition and also confidence and also psychological. We want to make sure that we're eating enough to fuel that. She will improve her performance from that, because the risk is if she's not confident, she feels she needs to lose weight because maybe a coach has said something they shouldn't have said, or just perception of herself. She might restrict calories further than 1,900 calories that she's eating just now because she feels she needs to lose more weight, and the cycle just gets worse. And I think we really need to address this with young athletes, and I think if we don't, we're going to set ourselves up for big issues with athletes longer term. And for me, performance comes after you've sorted these problems. And again, this takes us into 2,500 calories per day. If you get this athlete eating 2,500 calories a day, based on that 800 calories of training, they will perform better, they'll recover faster, everything else will get better, they'll probably feel more confident in themselves because of that. If we don't do that, it just keeps extending itself long. So last few slides here. So key takeaways, health first. You can't perform if your tank's running low all the time. You need to make sure that the nutrition is provided sufficiently for what you need to carry out basic functions within the body and also for your training. Free fat mass to me is now king. The more I look at it, the more it makes sense. Nutrition targets should be based on that. Your lean mass that needs activity, not just general guidelines based on your some standard numbers for male and female. Aim for 45 kilocalories per kilogram of free fat mass to ensure optimal health function. If you get that right, most things will start to improve. And again, weight loss can only be achieved after the body is out of the danger zone. So if you only take one thing from this talk here, is low energy availability is a solvable problem. It's not about willpower, it's not about restricting and fighting the urge to eat, it's about maths fundamentally. It's about how much we actually need to function and then how much we need to actually get into the sort of ideal range from that. But I think if you get the body know it's getting enough energy, it's going to stop fighting, the injuries are going to reduce, the fatigue ultimately lifts, which is something that I'm working on with myself. And then eventually, the body composition goals become achievable because you're eating enough to fuel that. So your engine is effectively working properly. But 3 things I think you can change tomorrow. I think stop backloading calories, so stop starving all day and binging at dinner. Move more of the food to the start of the day and around your training. Fuel the work you do. I think it's really important, and a lot of people speak about that. Is if you're training lots, you need to eat enough. If you're training endurance sport, we need carbohydrates. We need to make sure that we're fueling. Fuel on rest days. So even though and where this can kind of work in terms of nutrition, if you're maybe not eating enough on a busy day, so for example the swimmer where they get up in the morning early, the days that maybe they're not swimming, we need to eat maybe a bit more. That might balance itself out over a few days, over that sort of 24, 48 hours, and making sure that we're not underfueling just because we're on a rest day, where actually if we're chronically underfueled and we underfuel on a rest day, it just keeps that issue going. And higher carbs with intensity, that's more commonly, I think, accepted. It's effectively like the spark plug. We need the carbohydrates to fuel the intensity. I think people fear carbohydrates when trying to hit high intensity, and they don't want to eat carbs because they think it's going to help them lose weight. I think if your body's not eating enough, it doesn't really matter what you eat, you're going to have dysfunction. So if you're training in the higher intensity ranges, make sure you're giving yourself enough carbohydrates to fuel activity. Otherwise, something else is going to have to make up the deficit, or if it's not made up in the deficit, the body goes into the safe mode. And yeah, I think ultimately we play the long game. It's not how quick you can lose weight overnight, and I think we often get obsessed with being lighter, thinking it's the only way to be faster. But I think the data that we look at here, in general, physiology tells a different story. It's effectively the most successful athletes are the ones who, it's not who suffers or starves the most, it's the one who absorbs the most training. And no amount of training more will outplay a low energy availability athlete. So an underfed athlete will ultimately may win a race. They might be good enough to win a race or two, but a well-fueled athlete's going to have a career. They can sustain output longer because their body has enough. So I think if you take care of your health, so you have enough energy available to function, performance will come from itself, and I think eventually body composition will optimize from that as well. So making sure we eat enough is highly critical. Welcome any comments from that. Anybody got anything else to add to that? Absolutely happy to accept. Again, this is just more a bit of my own exploration into some of this stuff. The more I look at it, it makes sense, and the more I've worked with athletes to explain this to them, they see the picture better and understand why they maybe need to eat more and why maybe some of the issues they've been having have been an issue, and ultimately how to solve them long term so that they improve performance, which is ultimately the goal. Yeah, any questions, give me a shout, and hopefully someone gets some benefit from that.